Today, we're going to go on a pretty wild journey, all the way from the secret life of a single word to the vast worlds built by our arguments. We'll start by putting a couple of everyday words under the microscope. Then we'll zoom out to see how words travel across the globe, and finally, how we use them to build the very structures of logic and persuasion.
All right, let's just dive right in. We're going to take a closer look at a couple of words you've probably used 1,000 times without even thinking about it. But believe me, they have some stories to tell.
So let me ask you something. Think about the words retire and tired. They sound super similar, right? And, it makes sense. You retire because you're tired of working. It seems totally obvious that they must come from the same root.
Well, get this. They are completely, 100% unrelated. It's crazy. Retire actually comes from an old French word, retirer, which means to pull back. But tired? That comes from a totally different place, an old English word, tiorian, which means to become weary. They just happen to sound alike after centuries of language changing.
And that is the incredible power of etymology, the study of where words come from. It's like being a detective. Every single word is a tiny historical artifact. And if you look close enough, you can find these hidden stories and surprising connections. Or, in this case, a surprising lack of one.
Okay, so we've looked at the microscopic level. Now, let's zoom out. We've seen the secret life of one word, but what about how words travel across borders, cultures, and entire languages?
No language is an island. They're all constantly talking to each other, bumping into each other, evolving and changing through what linguists call language contact. And really, the most common way they influence each other is by just borrowing words.
I mean, just think about some of the loan words we use every day. We go to a cafe, which is French. We study algebra, which comes from Arabic. We send our kids to kindergarten, a German word. They're such a normal part of our lives that we've totally forgotten they were ever foreign. English is basically this amazing mosaic built from languages all over the world.
And to give you a sense of just how huge this borrowing can be, consider this. Way back in the 11th century, after the Norman conquest, a flood of French words poured into English. So many, in fact, that today they make up a full quarter of our entire vocabulary, a whole 25%. That's just a massive linguistic footprint.
All right, it's time to zoom out one last time, as far as we can go. We've gone from the DNA of a single word to the global flow of language. Now, let's look at how we assemble all those words into these grand structures that shape our world. Arguments.
Think about it like this. Words are like bricks. With those bricks, you can build a really solid, logical, well-reasoned house. But you can also use those same bricks to build something that just looks sturdy on the outside, but is actually designed to fool you or just fall apart the second you inspect it.
So, here's the big question. How do we tell the difference? How can we spot a well-built argument from a shaky one that's about to collapse? Well, it all starts with learning to recognize the common flaws in their construction.
These common errors in reasoning actually have a name. They're called logical fallacies. You can think of them as common blueprints for bad arguments or structural weaknesses. And the cool part is, once you learn to spot them, you will start seeing them everywhere.
Okay, let's look at an example. Just read this quote for a second. You can kind of feel that something is wrong with this reasoning, right? The argument isn't really about astronomy at all, it's about the girl's age.
This is a classic ad hominem fallacy. It's Latin for to the person, and that's exactly what it is. Instead of dealing with her ideas about Kepler, the argument just attacks her directly. Her age is completely, totally irrelevant to whether her reasoning is good or bad.
Here's another one you'll see all the time, especially in debates. So one person makes a point, the city of Berkeley should not observe Columbus Day. And the other person fires back, my opponent believes we should erase our history. Do you see what happened there? The response isn't to the actual point, is it?
This is a perfect example of the straw man fallacy. You basically ignore your opponent's actual argument, the real man, and instead you build this flimsy, easy-to-knock-over caricature out of straw. Then you attack that instead. It's a super common diversion tactic.
How about this one? At first glance, it almost sounds reasonable. But wait a second. There's a huge leap in logic going on here. This conclusion is making a massive claim based on, well, very, very little evidence.
Yep, this one is called a hasty generalization. The sample size, just 2 people, is way, way too small to draw a conclusion about an entire country of millions. It's a classic error of jumping to conclusions.
And here is one that is so incredibly powerful because it uses personal stories. I'm sure we've all heard some version of this, where a single personal story is used to try and dismiss a whole mountain of scientific evidence.
We call this the fallacy of anecdotal evidence. Now look, personal stories are really compelling, but it's a huge flaw in reasoning to let one powerful story outweigh tons of systematic data. One person's experience just doesn't cancel out a general scientific finding.
So you might be wondering, okay, why learn all these fancy labels, ad hominem, straw man? Well, as the linguist Steven Pinker points out, when you give a label to a complex idea, you get a mental handle for it. When you can name a flaw in reasoning, you can spot it so much more easily. You're building a toolkit to understand the arguments you hear every single day.
And just like that, we've come full circle. We started with that tiny microscope, looking at retire and tired. Then we zoomed out to see words like cafe crisscrossing the globe. And then we took that final telescopic view to see how all those little words get built into the logical or illogical structures that shape our entire world.
So I'll leave you with this question. We've given you the labels, this new mental toolkit. The next time you're listening to a debate, or watching the news, or even just in a casual conversation, what are you going to be listening for? Now that you can spot a fallacy, how will you listen differently?